The morning sun was already hot when Maria Rodriguez woke up at 6 a.m. She looked outside her apartment window and saw the weather report on her phone. It was going to be one of the hottest days of the summer. The temperature would reach 95 degrees by noon. Maria sighed as she got ready for what she knew would be a very important day. Maria was not just any police officer. She was the new police commander for the downtown district. She had worked hard for 15 years to get this position. She started as a regular patrol officer when she was just 22 years old. Now, at 37, she was in charge of making sure all the police officers in her area were doing their jobs correctly. But Maria had a big problem. For the past 3 months, she had been getting many complaints from people in the community. They said some police officers were being rude and mean to regular citizens. The complaints were especially coming from Black and Hispanic families who lived in the area. They said officers were treating them unfairly and with no respect. Maria had read every single complaint that came to her desk. There were stories of officers being rude during traffic stops. There were reports of officers using harsh language with teenagers who were just hanging out with friends. Some families said officers would stop their children for no good reason and make them feel scared and embarrassed. The worst part was that most of these complaints mentioned the same few officer names over and over again. One name that appeared in many reports was Officer Jake Morrison. People described him as a big, angry man who seemed to enjoy making others feel small and powerless. Maria had never met Morrison in person, but she had studied his record carefully. Morrison had been a police officer for 8 years. In his first few years, he had received good reviews from his supervisors, but in the last 3 years, his behavior had changed. He had received several warnings for being too aggressive during arrests. He had been reported for using inappropriate language with citizens. Despite all these problems, he had never faced serious consequences for his actions. Maria knew she needed to do something about this situation. She could not let officers in her district treat people badly and get away with it. But she also knew that just reading reports in her office would not give her the full picture of what was really happening on the streets. That morning, Maria made an important decision. Instead of wearing her police uniform to work, she put on regular clothes. She wore simple jeans, a plain white t-shirt, and comfortable walking shoes. She wanted to walk around the downtown area and see for herself how her officers were treating people. She wanted to observe without anyone knowing who she really was. Maria left her apartment at 8 a.m. and started walking toward the busiest part of downtown. The sun was already making the sidewalks hot under her feet. She could see that it was going to be a very uncomfortable day for everyone, especially for people who had to work outside or walk long distances. As she walked through the neighborhoods, Maria noticed many things. She saw elderly people sitting on their front steps trying to stay cool in whatever shade they could find. She saw children playing in the spray from fire hydrants that had been opened to help people cool down. She saw construction workers taking frequent breaks and drinking lots of water to avoid getting sick from the heat. Maria also noticed the police officers she passed during her walk. Most of them seemed to be doing their jobs properly. They were polite when they talked to people. They helped direct traffic when needed. They checked on elderly residents to make sure they were staying safe in the heat. These officers made Maria feel proud of the police department. But Maria also noticed that the officers she observed were mostly the ones working in the nicer parts of the district. She realized she needed to walk to the areas where most of the complaints were coming from. These were the neighborhoods where many working-class families lived, including lots of Black and Hispanic families. After walking for about an hour, Maria stopped at a small food cart run by an elderly Hispanic man named Carlos. The cart sold cold drinks, ice cream, and fresh fruit. Carlos had been running his cart in the same spot for over 10 years. Maria had read about him in some community reports. He was known as a kind man who often gave free drinks to children who did not have money. "Good morning," Carlos said with a big smile when Maria approached his cart. "It's going to be a very hot day today. What can I get for you?" "I'll take a cold soda, please," Maria replied, smiling back at him. As Carlos prepared her drink, she asked, "How is business today?" Carlos shook his head sadly. "Not so good lately," he said quietly. Some police officers have been giving me trouble. They say I need special permits that I already have. They make my customers nervous by standing around and asking questions. Yesterday, one officer told me I might have to move my cart somewhere else. Maria listened carefully to what Carlos was saying. This was exactly the kind of problem she had been reading about in the complaint reports. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said. "You seem like you're providing a good service to the community." "I try my best," Carlos replied, handing her the cold soda. "I've been here for many years. I know all the families in this neighborhood. I just want to make an honest living and help people stay cool on hot days like this." Maria paid for her drink and thanked Carlos. As she continued walking, she thought about what he had told her. She realized that the problems in her district were even worse than she had imagined. Officers were not just being rude to people during arrests or traffic stops. They were also harassing small business owners who were just trying to make a living. The sun continued to get hotter as Maria walked deeper into the neighborhood. She could feel sweat starting to form on her forehead, and she was grateful for the cold drink Carlos had given her. She looked around and saw that many people were struggling with the heat. Some were carrying water bottles, others were using small fans, and many were walking slowly to avoid getting too tired. As Maria turned onto a busy street lined with small shops and restaurants, she noticed something that made her stop and pay attention. About half a block ahead, she could see a young girl sitting on the steps of a closed store. The girl looked to be around 12 years old, and she appeared to be having a hard time dealing with the heat. Maria watched as the girl used a piece of paper to fan herself. The child kept looking up and down the street, as if she was waiting for someone to come pick her up. Maria could see that the girl was sweating and looked tired. She seemed to be trying to stay in whatever small bit of shade she could find. Maria started walking toward the girl, thinking she might offer to help, or at least check if she needed anything. But before she could get there, she heard the sound of heavy footsteps coming from behind her. She turned around and saw a large police officer walking quickly toward the same spot where the girl was sitting. Maria immediately recognized the officer from the description she had read in so many complaint reports. It was Jake Morrison, the officer whose name appeared in more complaints than any other. He was a big man, probably around 6 feet tall and heavily built. He had an angry expression on his face, and he was walking with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested he was about to confront someone. Maria quickly stepped to the side and pretended to look in a shop window. She wanted to observe what Morrison would do without him knowing she was watching. She had a feeling that she was about to witness exactly the kind of behavior that had been described in all those complaint reports. The young girl on the steps looked up as Morrison approached. Even from a distance, Maria could see the fear that immediately appeared in the child's eyes. The girl seemed to sense that she was about to be in trouble, even though she had not been doing anything wrong. Officer Jake Morrison walked up to the young girl with heavy, loud steps. Each step he took seemed to make the concrete sidewalk shake a little. Maria watched from her hiding spot near the shop window, her heart beating faster as she saw the scene about to unfold. The girl on the steps looked up at Morrison with wide, frightened eyes. She was clearly scared, but she had no idea why this big police officer was coming toward her with such an angry look on his face. Morrison was exactly as the complaint reports had described him. He was a tall, heavy-set man with thick arms and a red face that looked like he was always angry about something. His police uniform was tight on his large body, and his badge gleamed in the bright sunlight. He had short, dark hair and small, mean-looking eyes that seemed to look for trouble wherever he went. The girl, whose name was Sarah, was only 12 years old. She was a thin, pretty child with dark skin and long black hair that was tied back in a simple ponytail. She wore a clean but simple dress that her mother had bought for her at a discount store. Her shoes were old but well-maintained, showing that her family took care of their belongings even though they did not have much money. Sarah had been sitting on those steps for almost 30 minutes. Her mother worked as a cleaning lady in the IE office building across the street. Every day during summer vacation, Sarah would walk to her mother's workplace and wait for her to finish work so they could go home together. Her mother had told her to always sit in the same spot so she would be easy to find when work was over. The steps where Sarah sat belonged to an old store that had been closed for several months. The store used to sell used clothes and small household items, but the owner had to close it because not enough people were buying things. Now the windows were covered with brown paper, and there was a "For Rent" sign hanging in the door. But the steps were still there, and they provided a little bit of shade during the hottest part of the day. "Hey you," Morrison called out loudly, as he got closer to Sarah. His voice was rough and unfriendly. "What are you doing sitting there?" Sarah looked up at him with confusion. She did not understand why he was talking to her in such a mean way. She had not been doing anything wrong. She was just sitting quietly and waiting for her mother. "I'm waiting for my mom," Sarah said in a small, quiet voice. She was trying to be polite, but she was also very scared. She had never been spoken to by a police officer before, and she did not understand why this one seemed so angry with her. "I don't care what you're waiting for," Morrison said, his voice getting louder. "You can't sit here. This is private property. Can't you read the signs?" He pointed to a small "No Loitering" sign that was barely visible on the door of the closed store. The sign was old and faded, and most people walking by would never even notice it. Sarah looked at the sign and then back at Morrison. "I'm sorry." "Sir," she said, still speaking very quietly, "I didn't see the sign. My mom told me to wait here every day. She works right across the street and she'll be done soon. Can I please just wait until she comes?" Morrison's face got even redder when Sarah tried to explain herself. He did not like it when people tried to give him explanations or excuses. In his mind, when he told someone to do something, they should just do it without asking questions or trying to negotiate. "I said you can't sit here," Morrison repeated, this time speaking even more loudly. "I don't want to hear your sob story about your mother. There are plenty of other places you can wait. Move along right now, or I'll have to call your parents and tell them you were causing trouble." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She was not causing any trouble, and she did not understand why this police officer was being so mean to her. She looked around the street trying to see if there was anywhere else she could go, but everywhere else was in the direct sunlight, and it was so hot that she was already feeling dizzy and sick. "Please, sir," Sarah said, her voice shaking a little. "It's really hot today and there's no shade anywhere else. I promise I'm not bothering anyone. I'm just sitting here quietly. My mom will be here in just a few minutes." But Morrison was not interested in listening to Sarah's explanation. He had already decided that he wanted her to leave, and nothing she could say would change his mind. In fact, the more she tried to explain herself, the angrier he became. Maria watched all of this from her hiding spot, feeling her anger grow with every word Morrison spoke. She could see that Sarah was a polite, well-behaved child who was just trying to follow her mother's instructions. There was absolutely no reason for Morrison to treat her this way. Several other people on the street had also started to notice what was happening. A few shop owners came to their doorways to watch. Some people walking by slowed down to see what the police officer was doing. But nobody said anything. They all seemed afraid to get involved when a police officer was clearly angry about something. Morrison looked around and saw that people were watching him. Instead of making him behave better, this seemed to make him want to show off his power even more. He wanted everyone to see that he was in charge and that people had to do what he said. "You know what?" Morrison said, reaching for the water bottle that was attached to his police belt. "Maybe you need some help cooling down. Maybe that will help you think more clearly about following instructions." Sarah looked at the water bottle with confusion. She thought maybe Morrison was going to offer her a drink to help her deal with the heat. For a moment, she felt a little bit of hope that maybe this police officer was not as mean as he had seemed. But Maria, watching from her hiding spot, immediately understood what Morrison was planning to do. She had seen enough bullies in her 15 years as a police officer to recognize the signs. Morrison was not planning to help Sarah with the heat. He was planning to humiliate her. "Officer Morrison, don't do it," Maria whispered to herself, hoping somehow that he would change his mind, but she already knew it was too late. Morrison unscrewed the cap of his water bottle and held it high above Sarah's head. The bottle was full of cold water that he had gotten from the police station's refrigerator before starting his patrol. Sarah looked up at him with trust in her eyes, still thinking he might be trying to help her. There, Morrison said with a cruel laugh. This should cool you right down. Then he turned the bottle upside down and poured the entire contents over Sarah's head. The cold water hit Sarah like a shock. It soaked through her hair and ran down her face and neck. Her dress became wet and stuck to her thin body. The water was so cold compared to the hot air that it made her gasp and shiver at the same time. But the physical shock of the cold water was nothing compared to the emotional shock of being treated so cruelly. Sarah had never been humiliated like this before in her life. She sat there for a moment, dripping wet and unable to believe what had just happened to her. Then she started to cry. Not just quiet tears, but loud, heartbroken sobs that came from deep inside her chest. She cried because she was shocked and confused. She cried because she was embarrassed in front of all the people who were watching. She cried because she did not understand why a police officer, someone who was supposed to protect people, had been so mean to her. Morrison looked down at the crying, soaking wet child and smiled with satisfaction. "There you go," he said loudly so that everyone watching could hear him. "Now you're all cooled off. Maybe next time you'll listen when a police officer tells you to move along." The people watching from the street looked shocked and horrified. Some of them shook their heads in disbelief. Others pulled out their phones and started recording what was happening. But still, nobody spoke up to defend Sarah or to tell Morrison that what he had done was wrong. Maria felt her hands shaking with anger as she watched Sarah sit there crying, her dress clinging to her small body and water still dripping from her hair. This was exactly the kind of police misconduct that she had been reading about in all those complaint reports. But seeing it happen in person was much worse than just reading about it on paper. She knew that she could not stand by and watch anymore. This innocent child needed someone to stand up for her, and Maria was not going to let Morrison get away with this cruel act. It was time for her to step out of her hiding spot and confront this bully who was abusing his power as a police officer. Maria could not watch anymore. Her heart was beating fast with anger as she saw little Sarah sitting on the steps, soaking wet and crying. The poor child looked so small and helpless after what Morrison had done to her. Maria had seen enough police misconduct in her career, but watching it happen to an innocent child made her feel sick to her stomach. Maria took a deep breath and stepped away from the shop window where she had been hiding. She walked quickly toward Morrison and Sarah, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She was trying to control her anger because she knew that losing her temper would not help Sarah. But inside, she was furious at Morrison for being so cruel to a child who had done nothing wrong. As Maria got closer, she could see that Sarah was shivering even though the day was very hot. The cold water had shocked her system, and now her wet clothes were making her feel cold in the hot sun. Water was still dripping from her hair and running down her face, mixing with her tears. Morrison was standing over Sarah with his hands on his hips, looking very pleased with himself. He seemed to enjoy seeing the child cry. He was looking around at all the people who were watching, as if he wanted them to see how powerful he was. Some people were still recording with their phones, but Morrison did not seem to care. He thought he was just doing his job. "Excuse me, officer," Maria said in a loud, clear voice as she approached. Her voice was calm, but there was steel in it that made Morrison turn around to look at her. "What exactly is going on here?" Morrison looked Maria up and down with annoyance. He saw a woman in regular clothes, jeans and a t-shirt, and he immediately decided that she was not important. In his mind, regular citizens had no right to question what police officers did. He was used to people being afraid of him, and he expected Maria to back down as soon as he showed his authority. "This is police business, lady," Morrison said in a rude, dismissive tone. "Keep walking and mind your own business. I don't have time to explain police procedures to every person who walks by." He waved his hand at Maria as if he was shooing away a fly. But Maria did not back down. Instead, she walked even closer to Morrison and knelt down next to Sarah. She spoke to the child in a gentle, caring voice that was completely different from the harsh way Morrison had been talking. "Honey, are you okay?" Maria asked Sarah softly. "Are you hurt anywhere?" She could see that Sarah was still crying and shaking. The child looked up at Maria with grateful eyes, as if she could not believe that someone was finally being kind to her. Sarah nodded her head, but she was still too upset to speak clearly. I was just waiting for my mom, she managed to say between sobs. I wasn't doing anything bad. I was just sitting here like my mom told me to. Maria felt her heart break a little as she listened to Sarah's words. This child was clearly innocent and had been following her mother's instructions. There was absolutely no reason for Morrison to have treated her so badly. I know, sweetheart, Maria said gently, helping Sarah wipe some of the water from her face with a tissue from her pocket. You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes adults make bad choices and that's not your fault. Morrison watched this interaction with growing anger. He did not like seeing Maria comfort Sarah because it made him look like the bad guy. In his mind, he had been doing his job by making Sarah leave the steps. He thought Maria was interfering with police work. Hey, lady, Morrison said loudly, stepping closer to Maria and Sarah. I told you to keep walking. This girl was loitering on private property, and I handled the situation appropriately. You need to move along right now before I decide you're interfering with police business. Maria stood up slowly and turned to face Morrison directly. Even though he was much bigger than she was, Maria did not show any fear. She had dealt with bullies like Morrison before, and she knew that they were usually cowards underneath all their aggressive behavior. Officer, Maria said in a calm but firm voice. This child was not loitering. She was waiting for her mother who works across the street. She was sitting quietly and not bothering anyone. There was no reason to pour water on her and humiliate her in public. Morrison's face turned even redder when Maria criticized his actions. He was not used to anyone, especially a woman, telling him that he had done something wrong. His pride was hurt, and that made him even angrier. Listen here, Morrison said, taking another step closer to Maria in a threatening way. He was trying to use his size and position to intimidate her. I don't know who you think you are, but you better watch your mouth. I'm a police officer with 8 years of experience. I know how to handle situations like this better than some random woman off the street. The people who were watching from nearby started to get nervous. They could see that Morrison was getting very angry, and they were worried about what he might do. Some of them moved closer, ready to help if Morrison tried to hurt Maria. Others started recording more actively with their phones, sensing that something important was about to happen. Maria looked Morrison straight in the eyes without blinking. She was not intimidated by his size or his aggressive behavior. In fact, his attitude just proved to her that all the complaints about him were true. He was exactly the kind of officer who abused his power and bullied innocent people. 8 years of experience, Maria said, raising her eyebrows. And in those 8 years you learned that the appropriate way to handle a child sitting on some steps is to pour water on her head and make her cry? You learned that humiliating a 12-year-old girl in front of a crowd of people is good police work? Morrison was so angry now that spit was flying from his mouth when he talked. That girl was breaking the law by loitering, he shouted. I gave her a chance to leave and she argued with me. I dealt with her defiance appropriately. And now you're arguing with me too. Maybe you need to learn some respect for law enforcement. Respect? Maria said, her voice getting louder. You want to talk about respect? How about showing some respect for the people you're supposed to serve and protect? How about treating a child with basic human decency? How about remembering that your job is to help people, not to humiliate them? The crowd that had gathered was getting bigger. More people were stopping to watch and listen to the argument between Maria and Morrison. Many of them were nodding their heads in agreement with what Maria was saying. They had seen what Morrison did to Sarah, and they thought it was wrong. Morrison looked around and saw all the people watching him. He realized that most of them were on Maria's side, not his. This made him feel embarrassed and defensive. He was used to people being afraid of him, but now they were judging him and finding him wrong. You know what? Morrison said, his voice shaking with anger. I've had enough of this. You're interfering with police business, and I could arrest you right now for obstruction of justice. Is that what you want? Do you want to go to jail for defending some kid who was breaking the law? Maria smiled coldly at Morrison's threat. She could see that he was getting desperate and trying to use his authority to scare her. But his threats just proved that he was exactly the kind of officer who needed to be removed from the police force. Officer, Morrison, Maria said, emphasizing his name so that everyone watching would know who he was. Arresting me for standing up for an innocent child would be another abuse of your power. Just like pouring water on Sarah was an abuse of your power. Just like threatening me is an abuse of your power. Morrison was breathing heavily now, like an angry bull. He was so focused on his argument with Maria that he had completely forgotten about Sarah, who was still sitting on the steps watching everything happen. The little girl had stopped crying and was now looking back and forth between Maria and Morrison, trying to understand what was happening. "Ma'am," Sarah said quietly, to Maria, tugging gently on her jeans. "You don't have to get in trouble because of me. I can go find somewhere else to wait for my mom." Maria looked down at Sarah with compassion. Even after being treated so badly, this sweet child was worried about getting someone else in trouble. It showed what kind of person Sarah was, and it made Morrison's cruelty seem even worse. "No, honey," Maria said gently to Sarah. "You don't need to go anywhere. You have every right to sit here and wait for your mother. What happened to you was wrong and someone needs to stand up and say so." Morrison was getting more frustrated by the minute. He could see that he was losing control of the situation. The crowd was clearly supporting Maria, not him. People were recording everything he said and did. And this woman in regular clothes was making him look foolish in front of everyone. "Fine," Morrison said, his voice full of anger and desperation. "You want to play games? Let's see how tough you are when you're sitting in a jail cell. I'm placing you under arrest for interfering with police business and disorderly conduct." Morrison reached for his handcuffs, thinking that arresting Maria would solve all his problems. He thought that once he put her in handcuffs, everyone would remember that he was the one with authority. He thought people would be scared and stop supporting her, but Maria just stood there calmly, not moving away or showing any fear. In fact, she seemed almost amused by Morrison's threat to arrest her. She reached slowly into her pocket as if she was looking for something. "Before you do that, Officer Morrison," Maria said with a small smile. "There's something." Morrison stood there with his handcuffs in his hand, ready to arrest Maria. He was breathing heavily and his face was red with anger. He thought that arresting her would solve all his problems and show everyone who was really in charge. The crowd of people watching had grown even bigger, and many of them were holding up their phones to record what was happening. "Oh, really?" Morrison said with a nasty laugh. "What could you possibly tell me that would matter? Are you going to say you're some kind of lawyer? Are you going to threaten to sue me? Well, let me tell you something, lady, I've heard it all before. Nothing you can say is going to change the fact that you interfered with police business." Maria reached into her back pocket slowly and carefully. She did not want Morrison to think she was reaching for a weapon or anything dangerous. The crowd watched quietly, wondering what she was going to pull out. Even little Sarah, who was still sitting on the wet steps, looked up with curious eyes. "Actually, Officer Morrison," Maria said calmly, "I think what I'm about to show you will change everything." She pulled out a black leather wallet and opened it slowly. Inside the wallet was a shiny gold badge that caught the sunlight and gleamed brightly. Morrison looked at the badge, and at first he did not understand what he was seeing. The badge looked official, but he could not read the words on it from where he was standing. He squinted his eyes and leaned forward a little bit, trying to get a better look. "What is that supposed to be?" Morrison asked, but his voice was not as confident as it had been before. Something about the way Maria was holding herself and the serious look on her face was making him nervous. Maria held the badge closer so Morrison could read it clearly. In big, clear letters across the top of the badge were the words, "Police, Commander." Below that was Maria's name and her badge number. At the bottom was the official seal of the police department. Morrison's eyes went wide as he read the words on the badge. He looked at the badge, then at Maria's face, then back at the badge again. He blinked several times as if he thought his eyes might be playing tricks on him. His mouth fell open, and the handcuffs slipped from his fingers and fell to the ground. With a loud clatter, Commander Rodriguez?" Morrison stammered, his voice suddenly much quieter and higher than before. All the anger and confidence had drained out of his face, and now he looked like a scared child who had been caught doing something very wrong. "That's right, Officer Morrison. Maria said in a clear, authoritative voice that was completely different from the tone she had been using before. Now she sounded like the police commander she really was. Commander Maria Rodriguez, Downtown District. I believe you work in my district, don't you? The people in the crowd started whispering to each other excitedly. They had just watched a regular woman stand up to a mean police officer, and now they were finding out that she was actually his boss. Some of them started smiling, realizing that Morrison was about to get in serious trouble for what he had done. Morrison's hands started shaking. He looked around at all the people who were watching and recording, and he realized that his career was probably over. Everything he had done in the last 30 minutes had been recorded on multiple phones. There was no way he could deny what had happened or make excuses for his behavior. Ma'am, I didn't know. I didn't realize. Morrison tried to speak, but he could not find the right words. His mind was racing as he tried to think of some way to explain his actions, but he knew there was no good explanation for pouring water on an innocent child. You didn't realize what, Officer Morrison? Maria asked, her voice cold and professional. You didn't realize that you shouldn't pour water on a 12-year-old girl? You didn't realize that humiliating a child in public is not appropriate police behavior? You didn't realize that your job is to serve and protect the community, not to bully innocent people? Morrison tried to swallow, but his mouth was completely dry. He looked down at little Sarah, who was still sitting on the steps watching everything with wide eyes. She had stopped crying, but her dress was still wet and her hair was still dripping water. Seeing her like that made Morrison realize how terrible his actions had been. Commander, I can explain, Morrison said desperately. I was just trying to enforce the no loitering rule. The girl was sitting on private property and I was following proper procedures to make her move along. Maria looked at Morrison with disgust. Proper procedures? She said, raising her voice so everyone could hear. Officer Morrison, in what police manual does it say that pouring water on a child is proper procedure? In what training did you learn that humiliating innocent people is part of law enforcement? Morrison opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water, but no words came out. He knew that there was no policy or procedure that would justify what he had done. He had acted out of meanness and a desire to show his power, and now he was being confronted by someone who had much more power than he did. Let me tell you what proper procedure actually is, Officer Morrison, Maria continued. Proper procedure would have been to politely ask the child why she was sitting there. Proper procedure would have been to listen when she explained that she was waiting for her mother. Proper procedure would have been to show compassion for a child on a hot day instead of looking for ways to make her life harder. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word Maria said. Many of them had children of their own, and they were imagining how they would feel if a police officer treated their child the way Morrison had treated Sarah. Some of the women in the crowd had tears in their eyes as they looked at the little girl. Morrison realized that everyone was staring at him with anger and disgust. These were people from the community that he was supposed to serve and protect, and now they all saw him as a bully and a bad police officer. His reputation was ruined, and everyone would know what kind of person he really was. Commander Rodriguez, Morrison said, his voice shaking with desperation. Please, I made a mistake. I was having a bad day and I took my frustration out on the wrong person. I know what I did was wrong, but please don't end my career over this. I have a wife and kids to support. I'll do anything to make this right. Maria looked at Morrison with cold eyes. A mistake? She said. Officer Morrison, what you did was not a mistake. A mistake is when you write the wrong date on a report or forget to turn on your radio. What you did was a deliberate choice to abuse your power and hurt an innocent child. Morrison was starting to panic now. He could see his career, his pension, and his future disappearing in front of his eyes. Please, Commander, he begged. I'll apologize to the girl. I'll take sensitivity training. I'll do whatever you want. Just please give me another chance. But Maria was not interested in giving Morrison another chance. She had read too many complaints about his behavior over the years. She had seen, too, many reports of him bullying and intimidating people in the community. What happened to Sarah was just the latest example of a pattern of bad behavior that had been going on for too long. Officer Morrison, Maria said in a voice that was final and official, You have shown a complete lack of judgment, compassion, and professionalism. You have abused your authority and damaged the relationship between the police department and the community we serve. Your behavior today is unacceptable and will have serious consequences. Morrison's legs felt weak, and he thought he might fall down. He looked around desperately, hoping that someone in the crowd might speak up for him, but everyone was looking at him with anger and disappointment. Even other police officers who might have walked by would not support what he had done to Sarah. Suddenly, Morrison dropped to his knees right there on the sidewalk in front of everyone. The big, tough police officer who had been so mean to a little girl was now kneeling on the ground like he was begging for mercy. "Please, Commander Rodriguez," Morrison said loudly, his voice echoing off the buildings around them. "I'm begging. You. Don't destroy my life over this. I know I was wrong. I know I made a terrible mistake. Please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The crowd watched in amazement as the officer who had been so cruel just minutes before was now begging for forgiveness. Some people in the crowd felt embarrassed for Morrison, but most of them felt that he deserved whatever punishment he was going to get. Little Sarah looked up at Maria with confusion. She had never seen a grown man, especially a police officer, act like this before. She did not fully understand what was happening, but she could tell that the mean officer was in big trouble. Maria looked down at Morrison kneeling on the sidewalk, and she felt no sympathy for him. She thought about all the people who had filed complaints against him over the years. She thought about all the other children and families who had been treated badly by him. She thought about the damage he had done to the reputation of the police department. "Officer Morrison," Maria said in a voice that was calm but firm, "your apology is too little, too late." Morrison remained on his knees on the hot sidewalk, looking up at Commander Rodriguez with desperate eyes. Sweat was pouring down his face, mixing with what looked like tears. The big, tough police officer, who had been so cruel to little Sarah, just minutes before now looked like a broken man who knew his life was about to change forever. "Please, Commander," Morrison continued begging, his voice cracking with emotion. "I have 2 young children at home. My daughter is only 10 years old, just a little younger than this girl here. My wife doesn't work because she stays home to take care of our kids. If I lose my job, I don't know how we'll pay for our house or buy food for my family." Commander Rodriguez looked down at Morrison with no emotion on her face. She had heard these kinds of pleas many times before from officers who got caught doing wrong things. They were always sorry after they got caught, but they never seemed to think about consequences before they acted badly. "Officer Morrison," Commander Rodriguez said in a cold, professional voice, "you should have thought about your family before you decided to abuse your power and humiliate an innocent child. Your actions today show that you are not fit to wear a police uniform or carry a badge." The crowd of people watching was getting even bigger. Word was spreading quickly through the neighborhood that something important was happening. People were coming out of shops and restaurants to see what was going on. Many of them recognized Morrison from previous encounters, and they were excited to see him finally getting in trouble for his bad behavior. Commander Rodriguez turned away from Morrison and walked over to little Sarah, who was still sitting on the steps. The child's dress was starting to dry in the hot sun, but her hair was still damp and messy from the water Morrison had poured on her. "Sarah," Commander Rodriguez said gently, kneeling down so she was at the same level as the little girl. "I want to apologize to you on behalf of the entire police department. What Officer Morrison did to you was completely wrong, and it should never have happened." Sarah looked up at Commander Rodriguez with big, trusting eyes. "Are you really his boss?" she asked in a small voice. When Commander Rodriguez nodded, Sarah continued, "Does this mean he's going to get in trouble for being mean to me?" "Yes, honey," Commander Rodriguez said with a kind smile. "He's going to get in very big trouble. What he did to you was not just mean, it was against the law. Police officers are supposed to protect children, not hurt them or make them cry." While Commander Rodriguez was talking to Sarah, she pulled out her cell phone and made several important calls. First, she called the police station and asked them to send a patrol car to pick up Morrison. She also called Internal Affairs, which was the department that investigated bad police officers. Finally, she called Sarah's mother at work to explain what had happened and to apologize. Sarah's mother, whose name was Carmen, was shocked and angry when she heard what Morrison had done to her daughter. But she was also grateful that Commander Rodriguez had been there to protect Sarah and make sure Morrison faced consequences for his actions. "Thank you so much for standing up for my little girl," Carmen said through tears when she arrived at the scene 15 minutes later. "I work so hard to teach her to respect police officers and follow the rules. I can't believe someone who is supposed to protect her would treat her so badly." Commander Rodriguez hugged Carmen and assured her that the police department would do everything possible to make sure nothing like this ever happened again. She also gave Carmen her personal phone number and told her to call if Sarah needed any help dealing with what had happened to her. While they were talking, 2 police officers arrived in a patrol car. These officers looked professional and respectful, completely different from Morrison. They had heard about what happened over the police radio, and they were disgusted by Morrison's behavior. "Officer Morrison," Commander Rodriguez said in a loud official voice, "you are hereby suspended from duty effective immediately. You will surrender your badge, your gun, and all other police equipment right now." Morrison was still on his knees, but now he was crying openly. His whole body was shaking as he realized that his 8-year career as a police officer was over. With trembling hands, he unpinned his badge from his uniform and handed it to Commander Rodriguez. He also gave her his gun and his handcuffs. "Officer Morrison," Commander Rodriguez continued, "you are under arrest for abuse of power, assault on a minor, and conduct unbecoming a police officer." She nodded to the 2 officers who had arrived in the patrol car, and they stepped forward to arrest Morrison. The crowd watched in amazement as Morrison was handcuffed and led away to the police car. Many people in the crowd started clapping and cheering. They had lived in this neighborhood for years, and they had seen Morrison bully and intimidate many people. Finally, he was facing justice for his actions. As the police car drove away with Morrison in the back seat, Commander Rodriguez turned to address the crowd of people who had watched everything happen. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said in a clear, strong voice, "I want you to know that what you witnessed today is not acceptable police behavior. Officer Morrison's actions do not represent the values of our police department or the way we want to serve this community." She continued, "I encourage anyone who has had similar experiences with Officer Morrison or any other police officer to file formal complaints with the police department. We take these complaints seriously, and we will investigate every single one." Many people in the crowd nodded their heads and said they would definitely file complaints. Some of them had been afraid to complain before because they thought nothing would happen. But seeing Morrison get arrested gave them hope that the police department really would listen to their concerns. Over the next few days, Commander Rodriguez worked hard to follow up on everything that had happened. She reviewed Morrison's entire file and found a pattern of similar incidents going back several years. She discovered that Morrison had received multiple warnings for being too aggressive, but previous supervisors had not taken serious action against him. Commander Rodriguez also ordered a complete investigation into how Morrison had been allowed to continue working, despite so many complaints against him. She found that some supervisors had been ignoring complaints or not investigating them properly. She made sure that these supervisors also faced consequences for their failure to do their jobs. Within 1 week, Morrison was formally fired from the police department. He also faced criminal charges for assault and abuse of power. The case became big news in the local newspapers and on television. Many people praised Commander Rodriguez for taking quick action to remove a bad officer from the police force. The story had an even bigger impact on the community. Commander Rodriguez used Morrison's case as an example to train other police officers about proper behavior and respect for citizens. She created new policies to make sure that complaints against officers would be investigated quickly and thoroughly. She also started a new program where police officers would visit schools and community centers to build better relationships with families in the neighborhood. The goal was to help children like Sarah feel safe and protected when they saw police officers, instead of feeling scared or threatened. 6 months later, Commander Rodriguez received a letter from Sarah and her mother. Sarah had written in her careful, childish handwriting, "Dear Commander Rodriguez, thank you for helping me that day. The new police officers in our neighborhood are very nice and they always smile at me. I'm not scared of police anymore because I know there are good, ones like you. Commander Rodriguez kept that letter on her desk as a reminder of why her job was so important. She knew that getting rid of officers like Morrison was just the first step in building trust between the police and the community. But she also knew that what happened that hot summer day had made a real difference in the lives of people like Sarah and her family. The neighborhood where everything happened became much safer and more peaceful. The new officers who replaced Morrison were carefully chosen for their good character and their commitment to serving the community with respect and fairness. Crime went down, and people felt more comfortable calling the police when they needed help. Morrison never worked as a police officer again. He had to find a new job and explain to his family why he had lost his career. His story became a warning to other officers about what happens when you abuse your power and forget that your job is to serve and protect all people, especially children who need your help the most. Commander Rodriguez continued to work hard to make sure that all police officers in her district treated people with respect and dignity. She knew that building trust between police and the community would take time, but she was committed to making sure that what happened to Sarah would never happen to another child on her watch.